all hits all the time.
We are family.
Max Scherzer, double-digit Ks.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
Fun to watch.
Minus 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Into the upper deck.
Intensity is not a curfew.
Oh, mercy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome into MASN All Access. I'm your host, Paul Mancano, joining you again from my apartment on this Tuesday afternoon. We've upped the home decor game just a little bit. We hope that from wherever you're joining us, you're with your family, you're safe, and you are healthy as we wait for baseball to return to our lives. Well, baseball's hiatus has left us with numerous questions. Just a few. How much and when will players be paid? How much will the draft be affected? And what happens if there's no baseball played in 2020 at all? Well, a new deal agreed upon late last week between Major League Baseball and the Players Association attempts to answer some of those questions. Just a little bit, we're going to have Steve Molesky of MASNsports.com on to discuss the deal in detail. But first, let's take a look at some of the key components of the deal, starting with player compensation. Management will advance $170 million in player salaries over the next 2 months. But if the season isn't played, owners aren't responsible for paying player salaries after those 2 months. If the season is played and is shorter than 162 games, and that seems to be a virtual certainty at this point, player salaries will be prorated based on how many games are played. A big concession for owners: players who were in line to receive service time in 2020 will receive a year's worth of service time if the season is canceled. That means that players who were set to become free agents after the season will still be free agents even if they don't play a game in 2020. Now, owners and players also agreed to make good faith efforts to play as many games as possible in 2020. They agreed not to resume games until government and public health officials have decided that it's safe to continue. But both sides are willing to play neutral site games and games in front of no fans. They're also willing to play baseball past October. Another agreement coming out this morning: minor league baseball players will be paid $400 a week until the end of May at least, which is great news for minor leaguers who tend not to make a whole lot of cash on their deals. Now we welcome in Steve Molesky of MASNsports.com. Steve, in this era of social distancing, we are still resorting to FaceTime call, but we appreciate you joining us nonetheless.
You got it, Paul. Happy to be here. Happy to talk some baseball.
Let's start with the news that came down this morning about a new agreement between Major League Baseball and minor league players getting paid $400 a week until the end of May. We know minor leaguers tend to not make a whole lot of money. This seems to be a great deal just to make sure that minor leaguers can get through this time period.
Exactly, and you're right about that. I mean, we know about the big-name guys who get big bonuses, and they're probably financially in pretty good shape. But there are a lot of guys who did not get big bonuses, may have signed for $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, whatever it was, and their salaries are very low on the farm. That's just the way it's been. Minor league players have been underpaid forever, pretty much, but at least they're being paid, so it's something. It helps, and I'm glad MLB is doing that.
And then let's get to the Major League deal, because the Players Association and Major League Baseball agreed to a deal late last week on what would have been opening day. They agreed to advance some payments, $170 million going to the players over the next few weeks. But most interestingly, I think, when it comes to the Orioles, is the changes and potential changes being made to the MLB draft. The fact that the commissioner is given a whole lot of power to make changes to the draft, push it back, shorten it to as few as 5 rounds. What kind of impact do you think the draft changes potentially could have on the Orioles rebuild?
Well, the good news here is that there will be a draft, because initially we were hearing rumblings that MLB might just postpone it, maybe have 2 drafts next year, something like that. And so the Orioles lost a lot of games and earned that number 2 pick, which they have. So they want to make that pick. And Mike Elias has said, even though there were only about 15 or 20 college games this year to scout, they've scouted these guys for years, so they got their really good handle on the top players. So, Paul, they're going to have 6 picks over 5 rounds, if it is 5, and could expand that. It'll be at least 5. And those 6 players will probably be, even if they had drafted 40 rounds, let's say, they're still going to be the key 6, those top 6. You're going to find gems down the draft, you hope to, but no team will be given that chance this year. But the Orioles will still make those 6 picks. I did some draft math on it, and those 6 bonuses actually come out to more money than the Orioles had for 10 rounds last year. And that really is a result of, while they're picking 2, not 1, they're picking higher with their 2nd and 3rd picks. So the bonuses went up for their 2nd and 3rd picks, like $1.6 million when you combine them. So those kids will be getting some nice money, the ones who are drafted in 5 rounds anyway. And so it's not great for those that would have been drafted around 8, 10, 12, or 20. Some can still sign, but only for $20,000.
And of course, the NCAA made an agreement that they were going to welcome back players of spring sports, including baseball, to have another year of eligibility, not just the seniors, but everybody involved. So it sounds like while there won't be as many rounds and as many players going in, it could kind of increase the amount of talent going into the 2021 draft potentially. Do you see it as having that effect as well, Steve?
There are a lot of people that think that. Let's say it is only 5 rounds. A 6th or 7th round player might have gotten 200, 300,000 or more, and you would think that player is not going to agree to 20,000 to enter the game. Maybe some will. They just want to get into pro ball. They want to start their careers. But the NCAA now, everybody's getting their eligibility back. So if you were a junior when the season got canceled, you come back next year, you're still a junior. And so that gives them bargaining leverage in the draft. Seniors have little leverage, but a guy can come back for a second senior year, if you will, and maybe increase his stock a little bit. So the college players had that chance. The high school players who didn't get scouted, they could go the JUCO route, play 1 year junior college, and then you can be drafted. If you go to a 4-year college, you can't be drafted after 1 year. But if you go to a junior college, you can. So there are some options here for the amateur players.
I know we all wish we could have an extra year of college. Obviously, very different circumstances for this. There are going to be some interesting ramifications there, Steve. I want to get your thoughts, though, on the service time agreement there, the idea that if there is no 2020 season, players who are in line to receive service time will receive a full year of service time. Obviously, that most affects players like Mookie Betts, who could be a free agent after the 2020 season if there is no season to be played. But how might it affect the Orioles, who don't have too many pending free agents, but have a lot of young guys who might be in line for some service time in 2020?
Well, that's right. If there were no season played, someone who was about to be eligible for arbitration for the first time at the end of this coming year, and I think the Orioles have 6 or 7 of those players, they will now be eligible for arbitration. A player who was in a first year of arbitration will now be second year. So these are all important service time considerations to the players' union that they got assurances from MLB that they're going to have. So that was big for the Players Association side, and it could result in strange things like Mookie Betts never playing a game for the Dodgers. That possibility exists. For the Orioles, Paul, I went and looked. There are no players on the Orioles 40-man roster right now who have between 5 and 6 years service time, meaning if they got another year, they're a free agent. There are no players on the Orioles that fit that criteria right now. So no player would gain free agency via a season that was never played, which is kind of interesting thing for their specific team.
That is very interesting, and with the Orioles in particular, could be very strange if there is no season, because a lot of these guys would be a year older, but may not be as developed as much as they should have been at this point in their careers. Do you think that this could potentially, if there is no 2020 season, in the various ways and ramifications, could set back the Orioles' rebuild?
It could. Again, I guess the good news again is no team will have that advantage. So a low A ball player that the Orioles love is in the same boat as a low A ball player that the Yankees or Red Sox or Nationals or anybody else loves. They're not going to get their games in potentially this year if it comes to that. And so they'll all be set back. You always think about like Hunter Harvey, all the innings he missed over the years injured. Dylan Bundy, all the innings he missed on the farm. He had to go right to the major leagues because he had that major league contract. They had to add him. So it's a little bit like that, but it's like that for everybody if there is no season. So hopefully, knock on wood for all of us, at some point this summer we're seeing baseball. Those young kids are getting developed. Fans are back at Camden Yards, and we're back in a baseball press box covering the game we love.
Exactly. I can only watch so much of Netflix before eventually I'm going to need something else, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us here. And of course, you can read Steve's articles on MASNsports.com. Give him a follow on Twitter if you don't already, at MASNSteve. Steve, thanks again.
You got it, Paul.
We're continuing our 20 in 20 series, highlighting 20 players to keep your eye on in 2020 and beyond in the Orioles organization. Next up, Kyle Stowers, former Orioles second-round pick. Kyle Stowers had fans across the country before he even played his first professional game. Video of Stowers' reaction to being selected in the second round of the draft went viral. The Stanford product had a slow start to his pro career at the plate, but a full year of professional ball should help Stowers' bat catch up.
Went through a tough stretch. Hopefully I never go through it down the road again, but if I do, I'll know how to get out of it better.
And his speed and defense will play anywhere.
Something that's a big part of my game is being able to play all three pretty well. Whoever the other two are in the outfield, being the third, wherever I fit in that, works out well.
Stowers wasn't all that productive at the plate in 2019 with the Aberdeen Ironbirds, but he'd be the first to tell you that. .216 average, 6 homers, 23 RBIs, and a .667 OPS. 5 of those 6 homers came in the final month of the season, so a late power surge. He also has the ability to play multiple spots in the outfield, 22 games in left field, 11 in center. Next up is another Orioles former second-round pick, Caden Grenier. A year before taking Adley Rutschman first overall, the Orioles drafted another junior from Oregon State with supreme defensive tools. Caden Grenier's slick fielding at short made him the 37th overall pick in 2018.
What a play by Caden Grenier, a little overshift, able to get over into the hole.
I've proven to myself the things I can do on defense, so for me, I take a lot of pride in it now.
The 23-year-old earned a promotion to Frederick last July.
Hits a walk-off single for Caden Grenier.
If his bat catches up to his glove, Grenier could eventually become a Swiss Army knife in the Orioles infield.
I was lucky enough to go to Oregon State where they made us learn how to play multiple positions because they wanted us to be as versatile as we could.
Grenier ended up playing 82 games in Delmarva before getting the call up to Frederick, where he played 24 games. He hit just 1 homer in his time with the Keys, but he flashed those defensive tools that scouts have been raving about for years. All told, he played 76 games at shortstop and 26 at second base. His best long-term fit could be as a utility player, but if his bat comes around, his ceiling could be a whole lot higher. Yves Rosenbaum was named the Orioles' new Director of Baseball Development in the offseason. It's a different title than the Director of Player Development. That's Matt Blood. Yves Rosenbaum's job is to advance the analytical and technological departments of the Orioles organization, really oversee the organization on a much more macro scale. It's a fascinating job, and I had the opportunity to chat with Yves about it in February. We're joined now on MASN All Access by Yves Rosenbaum, who's the new Director of Baseball Development with the Baltimore Orioles. You're a Bethesda native who grew up an Orioles fan. What was it like getting the call that you were going to be joining your hometown team?
It was just so surreal. Honestly, it's still surreal to look out from my office and see the field. I go back and I look at the family photos we have in our basement. That's me and my brothers, standing out there in the green seats. We're like 6 years old. It's just so crazy to look at that photo and to think now I'm helping to run the team.
So let's talk about your history with the Astros specifically, because you worked in the international scouting department for the most part. International scouting is fascinating. I love it because it is really pure scouting. You're going out and you're watching very young players and you're projecting what they're going to be like in 5-10 years. And there's not a lot of information available. But that has started to change. Even 5 years ago when I started, you would go and you would see the player in person and you would take notes and you put in your report, and the team of scouts would get together with their director and so forth and make a decision. And just in the last 5 years, there's more information creeping up. So just even simple information about the player's height and weight, about their parents, where they live, and then all of the new technologies toward baseball stats, that's starting to creep into international as well. So you have MLB running showcases, and then they're sending out stats, and they're sending out exit velocities, and they're sending out sprint times. Another big change, though, has been the shift to younger players. So when I first started 5 years ago, we were scouting 15 and 16-year-olds, and then the industry has sort of shifted, and now you have some teams who scout 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. So you mentioned Kobe Perez earlier. Obviously, you haven't been in this organization for too long, but what have you learned so far being in this organization about how the Orioles specifically under Kobe Perez have bolstered their international scouting department? Yeah, so from what I've seen, it just went from almost nothing to a fully functioning department. And when he came in, it was him and maybe one or two other guys, and now we're signing players. We just signed a bunch of players about a month ago, and we're scouting, the 15-year-olds and the 14-year-olds, and really building up our database, our knowledge of these players. So it's like a drastic change from what I can tell. When you're scouting a guy who's 12, 13 years old, and then you can't really get your hands on developing him until he's in the organization at 16 or 17 years old, he might be a very different player because he wasn't developed right, or he was developed a different way than you might have. Is that a challenge as well? Yeah, that can be. Yeah, and that's one of the, the risks of the teams who commit players at a very young age, who go out and commit players at 12, 13, 14, because they're making a commitment to pay this player a lot of money, but then they don't get their hands on him for 2 or 3 years. So that's one of the risks that those teams take. You're just sort of looking back and hoping that the agent takes care of the player, and you can kind of go and check on the player yourself and just say, like, hey, how are your workouts going? How are you eating? You can kind of provide advice on the side, but nothing official. So in terms of your current role with the team, being the director of baseball development, how much does that differ from your previous role in Houston? It's definitely different in that in Houston I was 100% focused on international and international scouting. And here I'm focused on international, but then also the draft, and then pro scouting as well. And really what underlies all of those in terms of our strategy and our methodology, so sort of our philosophy of how we want to evaluate players in those markets, and then what tools are available to us. So I'm working on building up the digital infrastructure and building out tools that our R&D department can research and learn things, and then they can develop it and turn it into this really cool tool, and then our scouts are able to utilize that to make more informed decisions. And then during the season, I'll be also working with our player development staff in terms of what they're learning on the field about the players, and then taking that information back and making sure that we're incorporating that knowledge when we draft players and when we sign players in international. Awesome. Well, it's so great to have you sit down here on MASN All Access. Just several months into the organization, but getting your first taste of Sarasota baseball as well. Yeah, it's great. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Sure, no problem. Eve Rosenbaum, Director of Baseball Development, sitting down with us here on MASN All Access. Can't forget about the MASN All Access podcast, which comes your way every Wednesday. Myself and Bobby Blanco are the two hosts. You can catch the MASN All Access podcast on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts. Watch it on the MASN All Access Facebook page or YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can get the MASN All Access podcast. Talked a little bit more about the 220 in 20s that we broke down today, Caden Grenier and Kyle Stowers, and what their future could hold in the Orioles organization. That just about does it for MASN All Access. Thank you so much to Hannah Broder and Bobby Blanco behind the scenes. Again, stay home, stay safe, stay with your family. There's only one way we're getting through this, and that is together. Thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.